Good morning, Dan and Amy. Well, there are things going on in the world that the next president is going to have to tackle, hopefully much better than the incumbent president. One of them, the continued terrorism of ISIS in Syria and Iraq and the Middle East, and radical Islamic terrorism the world over. And President Obama, after he got back from lecturing the Brits about
don't you
leaving
dare
the
leave
EU.
the EU.
Back of the queue if you do.
Yeah, we're gonna hurt you financially if you leave it.
So after he got done there, he reiterated that he is not going to send troops to Syria. Right before he sent 250 troops to Syria. To make sense of this and other global matters for us, we're now joined by our friend KT McFarland, Fox News Channel national security analyst. KT, thanks for joining us.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. And if you think I can make sense out of any of that, you're crazy. Nobody can make sense out of any of it.
That's why we have you on. Because you're so reasonable.
The 250 troops to Syria, President Obama said it's evidence of his commitment to the fight.
Jesus. You know, look, it's a joke. This is the equivalent of throwing the maiden into the volcano in hopes that the volcano won't erupt. It's not going to change the outcome of the volcano, but it's going to make those natives feel that their leader is doing something.
Well, what is their assignment going to be? And I've been hearing in reports they're mostly Green Berets.
It's special forces, so you're right. It's Green Beret-like forces, and their job is to train and give advice to the Syrian rebels. But, of course, there aren't any Syrian rebels. So it's just not, I mean, it is absolutely a joke. But the tragedy of it is that the president, I think, is acting in the most craven political way. Throw a bunch of troops at it, throw the maiden in the volcano, tell the American people, look, my strategy is succeeding. Everything's going well. I'm committed to defeating and destroying ISIS. And I'm going to do it with these 250 troops.
Well,
but, I have full respect for the American Special Forces, but this is just not going to make a difference.
Well, right, and we laugh about it because it's so absurd, but the reality is you're putting 250 lives in jeopardy to make a political statement.
Yes, exactly. I mean, you've said it very well. That is bottom line, yes, the president's willing to do that for his own legacy. Now, what's the legacy that he wants? I think his plan is to keep all of the tragedies and fiascos at bay for another 9 months. So Iran's nuclear program, ISIS, Russia buzzing our ships and being provocative all along its border, China seizing territory in the South China Sea. Obama just wants to buy time so that what he can do is say, hey, look, George Bush started the war in the Middle East. He started Afghanistan. He started Iraq. And the next guy lost him. Barack Obama, my slate's clean. Nothing bad happened on my account.
Well, President Obama said the deployment of the troops is necessary to keep up this momentum against ISIS.
Well, momentum.
I know, but how else should we be defeating ISIS then? What other ideas are out there?
Okay, well, Amy, I think that, we've had 15 years where we've tried to do this, right?
Okay.
We beat the Nazis in a much shorter period of time, in less than 5 years. I think we need to say, this plan isn't working, but Bush's plan didn't work. We tried all-out war and forcing countries to be democracies. That didn't work. We tried ignoring it, sticking our head in the sand. That didn't work. Radical Islam, whether it's Al-Qaeda or ISIS or Boko Haram or name your witch's brew bad guys, they are now in more places and in greater strength than ever before. So I think the new president comes in and says, this is a threat, a global threat to all of civilization, to all Western civilization. I, the new president, am going to do the thing that only the president of the United States can do. I'm going to rally everybody. I'm going to assemble a warlike effort, like we did to defeat the Nazis, like we did during the Cold War. Sometimes some of you are going to provide military forces. That's the Sunnis in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. Some of you are going to provide ideological help, and that's the Sunni religious clerics in the Middle East. Some are going to provide financial assistance. It's probably us and the Saudis. Some are going to provide technological assistance, social media, cyber assistance. Assemble everybody together, including the Russians, and take this on as it should be taken across a multitude of platforms, not just military, which was the Bush solution, not just, I guess, a bunch of speeches, which is the Obama solution, but ideological, political, diplomatic, economic, military, religious even, propaganda, and then finally defeat radical Islam once and for all.
Prior to his trip to England that we mentioned, he was in Saudi Arabia. And I wonder your view on the 9/11 papers, those 28 papers from the 9/11 Commission that are classified, that the victims' families from 9/11 want released. And frankly, there seems to be bipartisan support. The members of the 9/11 Commission want them to release. Ted Cruz was asked about it. He wants them released.
Mm-hmm.
Hillary Clinton doesn't know what her opinion on it is yet, and she won't tell us if she read the papers or not.
Just take another poll.
Right, exactly. So where do you come down both on the release of those 28 pages as well as the legislation that would provide a pathway to litigation for the families against the government of Saudi Arabia?
Well, again, you're right, Dan, to separate them into two different things. They are two different things. One, the 28 pages have been classified for over a decade. Release them. Let the chips fall where they may. If it implicates other countries, if it implicates people, if it implicates certain wealthy families in the Middle East, let it fall where it may. And then you can decide whether you want to sue countries, individuals, companies. That would be the second step. But, at this point, the Saudis have been our frenemies for a long time. I mean, the deal has always been, you give us the oil, we'll protect you. Guess what? New deal. We don't need the oil anymore. We don't need to be in the middle of your civil wars. So unless you're going to work with us in a global coalition to defeat radical Islam, and that means step number one, going to your wealthy families, and the royal family of Saudi Arabia is wealthy and large, and the Saudi government knows who in that group is supporting radical Islam financially. Unless the Saudi government shuts them down, then when radical Islam comes for the royal family of Saudi Arabia, you're on your own.
Through your sources, have you been able to find out any information about those 28 pages?
I know a number of the people who were on the September 11th Commission and have talked to them about it, and they don't talk. I mean, they're not talking about this publicly. The handful of people who have read it, they're keeping the secrets as well. So I think, the implication was always, the sort of guesstimate was always that those 28 pages contained information about the government of Saudi Arabia or wealthy Saudis or Saudi royal family members, and it may have been the money trail. Where did al-Qaeda get its seed money? How did it have the support it had in the United States? So I think to end the speculation, the American people need to know once and for all. And any country or company that says to the American people and to the American government, if you release this stuff, we're going to blackmail you. We're going to sell all of our U.S. debts. We're going to destabilize the American market. If we succumb to blackmail, this time all we'll do is succumb to blackmail from the Chinese, from the Russians. Name your bad guy.
There seems to be a bit of a revolt in Europe as well with respect to how the leadership of European countries are dealing with the threat posed by radical Islamic terror as it manifests itself with the Syrian refugee crisis. And Austria this week, the far-right Freedom Party candidate has came up on top in the first round of presidential elections, the first time since World War II that candidates from Austria's two main parties did not make it to the runoff. Now, this is mostly a ceremonial post in Austria, but nonetheless, it's indicative of where public opinion is, and it's not with the Angela Merkels of the world.
Yeah, the European leaders, starting with Germany, have opened their doors and said, open borders, come on in, thinking that they were going to solve their economic problems. They have a demographic problem. They need unskilled workers. They don't have them. So they thought, well, great, we'll get those Syrian refugees. They'll be our unskilled workers. Everybody will be happy. But what's happened is the unanticipated migration of millions of people into Europe who don't speak the language, can't be assimilated, have very different cultures, live separately, are there without their families. They're young Muslim men between 18 and 35. So they're unemployable, unassimilatable, and potentially a security problem because in those millions, we know ISIS has already put terrorists, and that's what the Brussels attack was about, was terrorists who had slipped through with those migrant crowds. So the European people are saying, wait a minute, this is not the plan we want. And yet the leadership of most of the European countries, especially the Germans, have doubled down to say, no, open borders. So I think you're seeing, and you'll see it country after country, election after election, where the political parties that are saying no to immigration, or let's get a handle on the immigration, or let's make sure we vet the immigrants, those are the people who are going to go to the fore. And you're seeing it playing out, especially in Britain, where there's a referendum that the Brits are all going to the polls on June 23rd to vote whether they want to stay in the European Union.
Right.
One of the big reasons for that is if they stay in the European Union, they too will have to accept the migrants. If they get out, then they can decide their own destiny.
And President Obama, his back of the queue comment to Britain while he was there, and that drew a rebuke from London Mayor Boris Johnson, calling his arguments incoherent and suggesting that America wouldn't give up its sovereignty. Why should Britain give up its? Although Boris Johnson may be wrong, I think President Obama would be willing to give up American sovereignty.
Well, and President Obama talked about the great policies of the Europeans. These open borders are a great thing, and we've seen how he's handled the border situation and immigration situation in the United States. He does want open borders. He does want everybody to come on in. So I think that the interesting thing, though, is when President Obama was in Britain, gave the press conference saying, if you, Britain, get out of the European Union, we're going to punish you, and we're not going to have a free trade agreement with you. You're going to get to the back of the queue. You're going to be economically devastated. Now, a new president could come in and say, wait a minute, come to the front of the queue. And maybe what we are looking at is sovereign nations like the United States and Great Britain and Canada and other sovereign nations that are part, we could form our own trading bloc. And that would be a far more potent, powerful thing for our own economy, the British economy, where we're not shackled with all of those regulations of the European unions, the Brits aren't, and none of us are shackled with immigrant hordes that we can't vet.
Well, that's a forward thought. That's why you need to be part of the next Republican presidential administration. She is KT McFarland, Fox News national security analyst. KT, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
And she joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.